All right, so we're going to get going. I appreciate you guys being here very, very much. My name is Edward Kranz. I am a bookbinder and book restorer out of Erie, Pennsylvania. Um, I will preface this, I do not consider myself a master. I'm still very much a student. I've been doing this since 2012. And yeah, I don't consider myself a master yet. I'm just a guy who enjoys the research and learning and developing these structures. I started doing professional bookbinding at the onset of COVID. Up to that point, I was an amateur. I would do projects for friends and family. I would restore their Bibles or their AA books or whatever it is that they brought to me, and that's how I did my learning, was through trial and
Mhm.
error. And every book has its unique challenges. I I worked when I first started doing bookbinding, I worked as an airplane mechanic for the Boeing
Mm,
company and the 787 and the 777X, which is now the 777-9, I think. When I was working on it, it was still a R&D airplane,
mm,
experimental. So, and then I worked my way up into the upper floors. I became an analyst, and that's how I finished out my time there at Boeing as an analyst. During that time, of course, I was doing the bookbinding
mm,
in my spare time, keep myself out of trouble, which sometimes was hard to do. I came, Boeing laid me off, as big companies tend to do, and I moved my family back to my hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. My wife had never been here, and I really didn't feel like starting over in a big city again. I'm not old, but that's a young man's game, and so I came back to comfortable and familiar. Uh, my son is now going to be graduating high school this year, summa cum laude, and yeah, I started working for a plastics company here in town. COVID hit.
mm,
They laid me off. Well, they first it was remote work, then they laid me off, and then they said, "Hey, we're just not going to bring you back."
mm,
And I decided I didn't want to work for another company that could lay me off again,
mhm,
and I started doing bookbinding and book restoring full time.
mm,
Uh, I heard you guys talking about doing restoration work or conservation work, and what I do in my bindery is not what that you would find in a conservation lab. I consider what I do to be more book repair.
mhm,
I employ conservation, restoration, preservation techniques,
mm,
but I'm still very much a bookbinder who repairs books rather than a conservationist. I love the process of conservation and learning about it.
mm,
I don't have a background in all of the chemistry,
mhm,
all of the materials, which I think you were touching upon in conversation before. I love watching stuff by Sharif Afifi.
Ah,
Uh,
yes.
yeah, he's
Mhm,
an incredible man, incredible talent,
mhm,
and the knowledge that he shares really complemented it filled in some gaps that I had, because I didn't
mhm,
always have a mentor present. And
mhm,
of course, as we've come to this modern time, the 21st century, or even the last 5 years, the amount of information that is available for bookbinders and folks who want to do book repair has grown exponentially.
mhm,
Um, this particular course, we're going to be doing a very simple Coptic link stitch binding. This is meant as a beginner's course, very
mm,
rudimentary, very introductory, eh, tongue tied. Uh, so the type of books that we're going to make are going to be very, very simple. These little guys, and here we'll switch the camera angle. So just little simple basic. Uh, here's one with slightly different colors. And then, so we're going to make one of those, and then we're going to make one like this, a little bit bigger. So it's got more sewing stations.
mhm,
Now in setting this up, I realized that some of the work. I had done some pre-work, and I probably shouldn't have, but it balanced out between the two books. You'll get the entire process. With the little ones, I'd already cut and folded the paper in the signatures. In the bigger one, that's where we'll cut and fold the paper. The processes will all be there. So just some things will be slightly out of order. So a little bit of history, and again, I'm not a historian, and this is meant to be introductory. So the type of information I'm going to give you is very 35,000 foot level. So the Copts, they were a pre-Islamic Christian group out of Egypt. And I believe Copt was the Greek word for Egyptians back in the day. And when I say back in the day, I'm talking time of Christ and before. Now, back then, folks used papyrus and good old papyrus scroll. So this is one that we made last week. I had a demonstration on making papyrus scrolls, and this is kind of a modern sympathetic scroll. So it's got a linen leader, a hemp cord, and then of course we've got the papyrus. Now this particular scroll is now I'm forgetting the term. I want to call it a calicis, but that is the join, the kalima. I think I'm getting it right. And every time I say that, I always get Game of Thrones stuck in my head, and I want to call it Khaleesi. So kind of gives you an idea where my head's at. So now the thing with papyrus is it can be bulky, and it doesn't fold very well. You have individual sheets of papyrus, and you try and fold it into a folio or a signature, you're going to get about 2 or 3 bends or reads out of it before it starts falling apart. Well, the Copts came along, and so this here, I don't know how well you can see it. Maybe we can switch to this one. Okay, so this is a kind of a modern sympathetic reproduction of a Nag Hammadi. I want to say it is modeled after number 13. And so what the Copts did is they use a very simple stitch. In this case, it's a tacket. And they put way too many ties on these things. All right, there we go. So your signature was one big, thick signature with a reinforcement in the middle and tied through with the tacket. And that was their solution to have, to one or, a folio or small signatures. Well, you still have the problem of, well, what if you have a larger manuscript? And I don't know why I feel I have to tie that. And they started coming up with something very close to what we consider the codex. And this is an example of, I want to say it's roughly 4th century. But this is, I don't know how well the detail comes with this chevron, but there's 2 colors there to show that it's a 2-needle sewn. And then, of course, it's got the decorative end bands that are actually structural as well. So you ended up with something a lot more akin to what we're used to seeing today. And this eventually evolved into, so this would be 2nd to 4th century. And then you start this into the 4th to 8th century, 5th century, somewhere in there. And eventually you're going to evolve into, let's go back here. Now this probably should have been vellum. I used linen because that's what I had, and I'm still figuring out the structure. Sewn like German. I gotta get, okay. Everything's backwards on the camera. I gotta remember that. And then, of course, what we have today. So this is what gave way from the Coptic binding. They got us there. Okay, so scrolls to the first codices to hardcover. So a lot of the early Coptic bindings, they used wooden boards. There wasn't any glue necessary. The ones that we're going to do today, we're using bookbinder board, and so we've got a little paste down, and we're gonna glue the decorative paper on. So a little bit of glue involved, but not necessary for a Coptic binding. The tools that we're going to use, the foam folder. You're going to want some scissors. You're going to want some glue brushes. You are going to want pokey things, some form of awl, holes in the paper. When I put the holes in the board, I use this Japanese hole punch. It's a screw hole punch. I just like it. Not necessary. You can put your holes in the board with an awl or a nail, for all that matters. And then we're going to cut the paper down. So I've got a knife out here. The glue brushes, of course, you're going to need some paste or glue. In this case, I'm using straight PVA. You, of course, can use paste or 50-50 or whatever you want. If it sticks, it sticks at this point. These aren't necessarily meant to be historically accurate. So you're fine there. They were historically accurate, they'd have, of course, on wooden boards, oak. You will also need some form of needle. I'm going to be using a curved needle. I know some folks are partial to straight needles. I think you'll see once we get into this why the curved needle is definitely the way to go. But of course, that's personal choice. Okay, so I think that covers the intro. At this point, are there any questions? All right, so part of the intro, we're going to cover one more thing, and I think you guys are kind of advanced beyond this, if I understand from the conversation. But so when I use some terms, and this will be for the benefit of the folks not necessarily here. So you have your single sheet of paper, which of course, once you fold it in half, becomes a folio. You take your folios and you nest them. In this case, there's 4 in this signature. The signature, and there's various terms. I've heard these signature sections, quires, and I think it all depends on the region of the world you're from. And I think quire literally means 4 in this case. And so that's what we're going to be working with. We're going to be sewing together signatures. Now, when you're sewing a book, whether it's a Coptic or a traditional case-bound book, something you have to take into consideration is swell. And what swell means is how much, here we'll go, how much the book swells at the spine. So as you can see on this end where it's sewn, it's a lot fatter than over here. And that's because of all of the material in the spine. And that's, when I say material, I mean thread in this case. And this is a similar book. It has the same amount of pages, but you can tell that the swell is a little less. It's a little less than of a wedge of cheese. And the reason for this, there's a couple ways of controlling swell. The first, use thinner thread. Okay, well, with an exposed binding, one of the main, you want to see it. So if you get too thin, you can't really see the detail in the knots or in the sewing. The other alternative is this one here is set up with 4 folios per signature. This one here is set up with 6 folios per signature, and you can go 8. And what that does is it reduces the amount of thread that you have because you're reducing the amount of signatures. So that's something to keep in mind while you're working your book. And each book, again, is different. It really depends on, how your book was printed out. If it's a printed book, and you need to figure out, okay, do I want thinner thread? Do I want more folios in my signatures or less? But that's something to consider while you're making your books. All right, so for us, I'm going to opt for the less swell. And I've got a stack here of 6 signatures of 6 folios each. And 1, it gives me less swell. 2, that's less time you have to watch me sewing over and over again. All right. So what we're going to do, and this is kind of some of the pre-work that I did. I already cut my boards. I also cut my paste down, and I'm pretty sure these are rough cut to the right size. So I apologize, but I will explain how we get to the size of the boards. So with the Coptic books, usually your paper size and your board size are the same height and width. There's no squares, and by squares, I mean the amount of space that the boards overhang your text block or your book block, whatever you want to call it. In this case, I opted to have some squares. So you can see, I'll open this up, there's some squares around that text block. That is a personal choice. These are little products that I make and I sell in an online shop. But traditionally, it would be more like this one where the paper and the boards all come out even all the way around. There are no squares. And another option would be to bevel the boards, but I think that came later. All right. So to figure out the size of your boards, you need to know the size of your text block. And then you basically cut them the same size. So that's how I got the size of my boards. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly glue these out. This is a hemp paper, and I'm going to send out a link to this video because I'll post it. It'll live on YouTube for as long as YouTube allows it to live. You guys will get a link, and it won't be a public link. It'll be a private listed link. Only folks who have paid to attend this class. And then I also will publish it on my Patreon page because I've got paid tiers there, but blah, blah, blah. So in the notes, I will put down where I got all my materials in case you want to find some. This is a hemp paper. I forget the brand. I'll look it up, put it in the notes. This is papyrus. It's a rough grade. I wouldn't consider this a fine grade of papyrus. I got this on Amazon. I get a finer grade directly from Egypt, and again, I'll put that information in the notes. So the paste down, I just make, in this case, 2 to 3 millimeters smaller than the board. So if my turn-ins are 5 to 10 millimeters, then I leave myself 2 or 3 millimeters around the edge. It covers really nicely, which we'll see in a moment. I think I'm going to leave the overhead on at this point, and we're going to glue these out real quick. And I did not bring, I didn't, did I? All right. So typically, here, let me grab some wax paper. I'll be right back. So when you're gluing out material, a general, a good practice to follow is you want to glue out the thinner of the materials, or you want to glue out the one that you want it to pull in that direction. Because typically the sheet that you glue out is the one that's going to pull. Centered. Okay, I know a lot of times people already have their corners marked and trimmed. How's everybody at freehanding their 45s? I picked up the little gauges from iBookbinding. Smooth out any bubbles real quick. Little books are fun. You just pick them up. You can move them around. I'm going to tuck these in. So when I publish this online for you guys, I think what I'll do is I'll zoom in a little bit to the area. Okay, so I'm going to set this over here. I'm going to drop a weight on it. That is one of the other things you'll want, some form of weight. I use these old irons. I also, for a lot of, like when I do in-person workshops, I'll take bricks and I'll just cover them with bookbinding book cloth. When we get to the larger Coptic binding, I've already completed the case, less putting the holes in it. So you won't have to sit through this part again. Yeah, oh, my finger. So you want to leave a little bit of space at the corner, about 1.5 times the thickness of the board. So if you got a 2mm board, you want roughly a 3mm gap. Okay, so real quick and dirty. So that's got its artwork on it. I'm gonna throw that under the weight for a minute. And we're gonna glue this up. In doing my research for the papyrus scrolls, I learned something new. For years, I was gluing the panels together, and I couldn't find anything online that would tell me what kind of paste. I assumed, being Egypt, it would be, like a rice paste or, some other indigenous wheat or rice type of starch. And it turned out that the papyrus itself is very, very heavy in sugars. When you first take the plant and you're cutting it up into strips, it's like 25 or 30% sugar already. And they actually soak the sugar out of it over the course of like 6 to 12 days. So we now have a covered board with paste down. So that board's ready to holes put in it. I'm gonna drop that underneath the weight real quick. So it turns out, no answer, that to put your panels together, your papyrus panels together for a scroll, you don't actually need paste. The way they make it is the wet strips are layered, put together in their pattern with one layer going one way, recto, and the other layer going the other way, verso. And they put the wet strips together. They put it under weight. Back in the day, they used rocks because they didn't have presses, and that was it. The natural sugars would adhere the strips together. So I tried that. I figured, well, that's how they make the paper. Maybe that's how they put the strips together. And sure enough, I wet them, 2 panels, I overlapped them, and put it under weight for a couple days. Came out beautiful, much better than using a paste or a glue. Problem is, it's time consuming. Then I'm going to take the strip off. It's bugging me. All right, so there we go. We got second panel. So the covers are now done. That under weight for a minute. Okay, so the next step, we are going to figure out where our sewing stations are going to be. I am going to do this on a piece of paper. We can measure this out. In this particular case, I'm just going to make a little template. Do I seriously not have a pen? And do you have a pen handy? I was going to use a fat marker, but I think that'd be overkill. Normally I'd use a pencil, but I think a pen will show up. In this particular case, I'm going to go and I'll put my marks in 1 centimeter. It's an arbitrary number, especially for this size. I think bigger would be ridiculous. And so what I'm measuring is how far this is going to go into the cover there. If you're bookbinding and you plan on making more than one of anything, I highly recommend making little templates, because after I get done with this and I punch the holes, I'm going to use the same template to punch the holes in my paper. And then it just cuts down time on measuring. Now, I already know in this particular case that my text block or my book block is going to be, I'm going to call that, what is that? That's 4 millimeters, 4 millimeters smaller than my board. If you made your text block the same size as your board, you wouldn't have to do this, but I'm going to come in, say, okay, there's my 4 millimeters. There's my 4 millimeters. Okay. So I'm going to make my first hole 1 centimeter in. Again, arbitrary. I think it'll look good that way. Now, with this particular book, I'm only going to have 1 sewing station. So I'm going to measure, and this looks like 85, 86, 87. I'm going to call it 88 millimeters. I'm going to divide that by 2. So that's 44 millimeters. 44 millimeters. Yes, I know. I'm an American who uses metric. All right. So which way is best for you? My little template. I want to make sure that I'm going to be going the same way. I'll put this here. Now, usually what I'll do, these are a little bit small, but I'll put a little. Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll hold it. All right. Get this lined up. I'm going to take my little Japanese screw punch. I'm going to get these started. Got to be careful to not let it jump. If it pops up, it'll try and pop out of a hole. So I just got those started. I'm going to flip this over. So my holes are the same on this one. Just in case there was everything should be equidistant. But just in case. See, I jumped. Jumped. All right. You'll forgive me, won't you? All right. So now got them started. It's going to take a minute to get them all the way through. Oh, kitty. Or doggy. Kitty. All right. All right. The screw punches aren't a huge fan of the book board, especially the thicker boards. It's much better suited for paper and much thinner boards, but I just like the consistency of the holes. So here we go. We've got our two boards, holes are punched. So when I hold it up like this, is it in focus for you guys? Are you seeing it okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm just double checking. I'm making sure that I got light all the way through, which I do, which makes me happy. I have one little spot there where it jumped and I got an extra hole, but cosmetic. Okay. So this is how you make the boards. Do we have any questions so far?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
My first question is, I've been not talking because I'm worried your video is going to go onto YouTube, and if I talk, all you'll hear is me. Am I sort of, can you edit me out, or basically I'm not spoiling your YouTube video by speaking, am I?
Oh, no, this is fine. I mean, this is what it is. It's meant as a demonstration and a conversation, so
Okay,
perfectly fine.
all right, because I was keeping very quiet.
Oh, no, the way I look at it, as the attendees, there's going to be 8 people total who get this link, plus whoever watches it on Patreon. And if you have a question, there's a good chance that one of them may have a question.
Sure.
So, yeah, they might have the same one. So feel free. Generally, what I like to do is I go through a certain part, and then I'll ask if anyone has any questions about that previous section, and then I move on to the next one. So, yeah, if you have questions, feel free.
So I have a question from the previous section that I was being quiet on. I didn't catch, so the swell is reduced by, I've written it down, the swell is reduced by altering the amount of folios per signature. And did you say it's because it's less or more that reduces the swell? Less folios or more?
Okay, gotcha. So that's a really good question. The answer is, in this particular case, this has more signatures, same amount of pages, and this one has fewer signatures and it has less swell. And so it has the same size thread, but less swell because I have 6 folios per signature, 4 folios per signature. So there's 12 signatures in here. Yeah, and 6 in here, to do the quick math in my head. And to reduce swell, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. And one is to reduce the amount of signatures, and the other is to reduce the thickness of the thread. That's why a lot of Bibles will have really, really thin thread, but 2 of them. And the reason they do the 2 threads is because they can lay next to each other flat, where one thicker thread would just be a thicker thread. So you have the strength of 2, but they're thin. Now you can play with the combination of the thickness of the thread and the number of folios in your signatures, or the number of signatures in your book. And that will determine how much swell you have or you don't have.
Yeah.
Did that answer the question?
It did. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Excellent. No, that's a good question.
Cool.
And I sometimes wonder if when I explain things, I explain how I understand, and sometimes it might not come across correctly or clearly. So feel free to ask questions. Definitely.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so we've got our boards. So the next thing we need to do, and I'm going to put these back under weight while they're drying, and I'm doing the next step. So the next step, I've already folded these. We kind of talked about it earlier, where you have your single sheet of paper, single sheet folded in half makes a folio, you nest them, and you have signatures. So we're gonna poke holes in these. You can use book cradles. I use a local telephone book. And for the most part, especially for the smaller books, it works out just fine. All right, so what I do need to do though, and usually when I create, yeah, I got ahead of myself. Okay. Trim this down. So what I would like to do is I'm going to create a little hook. So I'm going to come down and I'm going to go to overview so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to come down about 1 centimeter and I'm going to go in about 1 centimeter. Come down here and go, oops, about 1 centimeter. Quick cut. All right, so what this does is it gives you a little bit of a hook, and I'll show you how I'm going to use that here in a minute. In the meantime, I am going to line that up. Now you can measure these out. I'm comfortable enough with just bringing my lines over. Now hold this up to the camera real quick so you can see what I've done. Essentially, I've transferred the holes that I put in the boards onto this hook. And now I need my cradle. So if you have a book binder, I've got a couple cradles. I almost never use them. So what I'm going to do, I'm probably going to prove why I need the cradle right now. I'm going to hook the top to my signature. And poke my holes. See if having the hook keeps all your holes in line, so you have a nice, pretty straight line. And again, what I'll do is before I post the video, I'll edit it and make sure that I zoom in a little tighter to this so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Okay. So now. We have these are our sewing stations. I've got one here where it looks like I went off just a little bit. It's not exactly on the spine, so I'm going to fix that really quick, and then we'll move forward. You want to make sure that when you poke your holes, you're going through the center of the spine. I'm off on both sides. I'm going to leave that for now. Call it good. But yeah, if you want to see what I did, this is correct. The hole comes out the center of the spine. This is incorrect. I missed both times, and this is off a little bit. It's not going to hurt the book horribly, but just know that this could optically be an issue. This is what you are going for. And let's put that in the middle. And make sure everybody's, nope. Interesting. All right, so the whole purpose of having the hook was to keep everything in line. And as you can see, this is just a hair off. That's probably the angle that I'm back further than I usually am when I'm working. But so here's your sewing stations. All right, so now we have our text block punched up. We have our boards. So you can see how the holes in the sewing stations are going to line up with the holes in our boards. We are now ready to sew this little book together. That's what we're going to do. Close up my glue. Glue off my fingers. It's always good to have a wet rag sitting off to the side. Wipe your fingers down or the table. All right. So the threads. I'm using an Irish linen. You probably recognize the brand. So it's a number 12, 3-ply. I'm using colored thread. So the type of thread you use, I mean, it's up to you. I'm using a heavier thread because I want to be able to see it. I've made some Coptic books where they weren't as pretty because you just couldn't see the knot. So I like using thicker threads. So I end up with a lot more swell. You can get, there's some pre-waxed thread. The wax thread is really nice because it helps your stitches and your links knots to really grip together. I would wax this thread, but I don't like the way it looks waxed. So this is a personal preference. Now, waxing your thread will make it sew a lot easier. It'll help it not tangle. So you're probably going to watch me struggle for a moment getting out a tangler or two because I'm stubborn and I like the aesthetic of this thread without the wax. Let's see, let me give myself a little bit more. And the other nice thing about waxing your thread is you can pinch it and it doesn't unravel as easy going through the eye of the needle. And my particular needle is really thin. I need to get slightly different needles, but we're having a class and can't do that right now. Ah, nice. Well, thank you, Thread, for not making me struggle on camera. That was really nice. All right, so I got my thread knotted up. I'm gonna try and take some of the twist out of it. Okay, so this is where I wanted to set up the table camera that broke. So what I'm going to try and do is lose my thread. Let's see if we can get this guy to work right. Okay. Now, the caveat here is this isn't a normal sewing angle for me. The camera is supposed to be back behind me to my right. So I'm going to try and do my best. Okay, so I'm going to call this the tail. I'm going to call this the head. I'm going to start down here at the tail. And what you want to do, you want to come from the inside of the signature out. And I did not punch it. Okay, I'm going to put a bigger hole in there. The holes that you put in your signatures need to be large enough for several passes of the needle and thread. All right, so you're going to come from the inside and you're going to come out. And what you want to do is leave enough on the inside that you can tie off. I'm going to leave myself a tail about yay long. All right. Now this is the other, this is the hardest part of Coptic binding, is getting it started and getting it finished. All the signatures in between are, if you've done a link stitch, you're going to ace it. But starting it is the hard part. And from this angle, it's going to be really interesting. I always go in the direction that I'm sewing. So I want to stay, I'm going from tail to head. So I want to stay on the head side of my thread. So I'm going to pull this through. And I will, in the notes, put a couple pictures of this. And my thread is bringing up dog hair. Nice. Okay, I did that wrong. Apologies. Just start over again. Bring this back out. And I almost lost my tail. I know folks that will tie a knot in their tail so it doesn't pull through. You can do that. I think it just adds a little extra thickness. When you go through your first hole, you want to go around. So you want to come from the outside in. And so you're going to end up with something that looks like that. And then you're going to do it a second time. So you're going to come around the outside again. And you want to try and stay, like I said, on the direction that you're moving. So I want to stay on the head side. Okay. So I have my 2 loops come out of the signature, and I got my first loop and my second loop. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to slide this forward. Needle out of my mouth. And I'm going to pull this snug. And I'm going to pull my first loop snug. And I'm going to pull my second loop snug. Now it's not going to stay tight because you have a tail on the inside. I got my thumb on my tail on the inside, like that. So I'm holding some tension on it. I've taken that as snug as it's going to go without further help. And going in the direction that I'm traveling, which is that way, I'm going to put my needle behind the thread and pull it through. And what this does is it locks that knot in. And then I'm going to go back in through that hole. Now, once I get back in through the hole, you know what I mean? You have to make sure you have enough, large enough hole for a couple passes. Here comes that tangling I was talking about. All right, so I'm going to pull this snug. And I want the spine of my signature and the spine of the book, or the edge of the board, to be flush. So I'm going to pull these snug enough without tearing anything or breaking the threads. And so I've got them both coming out like that. So I'm going to put a little weight there. And then I'm just going to tie this off in here. Use your favorite knot. This is why I didn't want another knot already in here. We're going to put one and leave yourself about 1 centimeter. Okay. Okay. So we've now have a really good start. So that's what you have on the outside. This is what it should look like on the edge. And then this is what you've got on the inside. We're going to do this again when I do the other book. So if you miss something, it's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out, and we're going to do the same thing again, where we're going to bring this all the way out. And I'm going to wrap around the outside. So you're starting to see how this curved needle is going to come in handy. If you had a straight needle, this would kind of be a really hard maneuver to do. And if you have a really snug book, straight needle can be very frustrating. So there's the first loop. I'm going to go through and do a second loop. And again, I'm going to try and stay on the head side of my threads. I want everything going the same way. You'll end up with a lot prettier chevrons as this progresses. And if I sound funny, because you can't see it, I'm putting the needle in my mouth, and bad habit. So I'm going to pull that first loop snug so it tightens up the inside. And then I'm going to grab my second loop, and I'm going to pull it snug. And then I'm going to grab and pull that one tight. I am now going to pass my needle behind. Come out towards the head. And again, this will help lock that in. Now you only do this type of maneuver on the first and last signature and where it attaches to the board. Now I'm going to go back in through that hole. Come on. We're not. All right, it looks like I may have passed through the other thread. That's something that you want to be careful when you're sewing. If you put your needle through the other thread, which is very possible, it could cause some issue. I don't think in this case it's going to. All right, so now we have two attachments on the board. That's what it looks like on the edge. I'm going to continue along and I'm going to come out the third sewing station. Now the head and the tail, once you get past this particular step, it's going to turn into what you're used to as a kettle stitch. So if you've done standard bookbinding, kettle stitch will be very familiar to you. If not, you'll see it here in a moment. Your center one, or if you have more than one center sewing station, it's going to be the Coptic link stitch. And it will give you this really nice chevron style, and it's done a little bit different than the. The thread broke for a second. There we go. So I'm going to bring the needle through, staying on the head side. Now, as I go the other direction, I'm going to favor the tail side. One. All right, so now that I've got that, I'm going to snug that up, tightening what's in here. I'm going to grab the second loop, snug that up, and I'm going to pull the second loop nice and tight. Now, without blocking your view, back in through that hole. Catching. Normally I have my thread go to the floor in front of me. There's that knot I was telling you is going to happen. Arg. All right. Give me a second. You little bugger. Ah, yay. Came out a lot easier than I was expecting it to. I didn't do that. I didn't do it, did I? Oh. Okay. I forgot to do the pass behind. So this is going to be fun because I need to do this definitely without hitting the thread. Looks like Okay. So once you get this snugged up, you want to do your final pass behind. Lock that down. There we go. Now I'm going to go back through the hole again. All right. So there you go. We're now attached at all 3 sewing stations. And I made yet another mistake. So once you're attached at all 3 sewing stations, you don't go back in to this signature. You need to put the next signature on top and go into that. Okay. Now we're attached at all 3 signatures, or at all 3 sewing stations. I'm going to take the next signature. I'm going to put it on top. And that's what we're going to go into. I'm going to make these holes bigger first because the struggle has been real. Okay, much bigger holes. I used a larger awl this time. So, and just like you would a regular book, you're going to just come back in. I'm going to make sure that my signatures are lined up. I'm going to go in from the out from the inside, center station. And then keeping in with going in the direction that we're going, I'm going to pass behind, headed towards the tail. And then I'm going to go back in. And so for your center sewing stations, that's all you're going to do is loop down in the direction that you're going in and go back in, catching that previous signature. And then as you build that up, you're going to have a really nice chevron like that. Okay, third sewing station, I'm going to come out. Try and keep things lined up a bit. Okay, so I'm going to assume everybody knows you do not ever want to pull in the other direction. You always pull in the direction that you're going in. If I pull this way, it's just going to cut right through my signature and I'll have a really bad day. All right, so I'm going to pull this nice and snug, make sure everything's lined up. And then, and just like a kettle stitch, I'm going to go behind the previous stitch. But what's going to be different this time is instead of just pulling that and going back in, I'm going to come up through that loop, just like you would a kettle stitch. And I pull that nice and snug. Boom. So now we're attached, and we now have our 2 kettle stitches and the start of our Coptic link stitch in the middle. And as we move our way up, you'll start seeing those chevrons forming. Now this is very introductory. There are various patterns that you can do with Coptic stitches. And in the fall, I may do a very detailed either workshop or demonstration showing that, because they'll put patterns and all kinds of really cool stuff. For a second. All right. So we're going to go back in. Oh. All right, I'm going to come out at the center sewing station. Okay, I'm going to put the needle down one signature, going in the direction that I'm traveling. But this one does not get the kettle stitch. You don't go through the loop. You go ahead and pull that nice and snug. And that's it. You'll start seeing at this point your chevrons the start forming. And come back out at the head. Now, being a blank book and everything's kind of equidistant, head and tail at this point are kind of moot points. I'm going to drop down, go behind there. Get everything tangled up. Okay. Before I close that loop, I'm going to bring my needle up and through, complete that kettle stitch. Nice and taut. Okay, so from here on out, it's rinse and repeat. So I am going to go ahead and grab my next signature. If you're wondering about the paper that I'm using, this is a bamboo paper. Everything about these little books is kind of ecology based, where the the cover is hemp and papyrus. The inside is bamboo. So it's kind of eco-renewable resource book. I just made the holes a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'm going to go back in through the head. I'm going to come out at that center sewing station. I'm going to drop down, put my needle through in the direction that I'm traveling. snug it up. And I'm going to go back in through the hole. And then come back out at the tail. All right, and then continuing the kettle stitch, I'm going to come up through that loop. Okay, so moving right along. Just widening the holes again. When I post the video, I'll probably edit this section out so you don't have to watch me. All right. So we have 2 more signatures to go. Now, when we get towards the last signature and the case, there's a couple different ways of doing it. One is easy. That's what we're going to do. And on the next book, on the next book, we will attempt the hard one. And I'll explain the difference when we get there. The hard way, if you are not used to doing this, can be very frustrating. Yeah. Yeah, snug that up real quick. There we go. So that racket was my dog. My wife got flowers. I believe they're from her sister. All right, so we go with that last kettle stitch here. Okay, as we go into the last signature, do you guys have any questions to this point?
Yeah, so I was just wondering if so the middle is essentially the Coptic stitch, and then the 2
Yes.
end stitches, yeah, are the kettle.
So yeah, these are your kettle stitches right here. And
Yeah.
let me back this up. Yeah, these are your kettle stitches. And this is a link stitch, which I mean, I realize kettle stitch are a form of link stitch, but this
Yeah.
is your Coptic link stitch.
Oh, thank you.
And then when we get into the bigger book, you'll have, well, kind of hard to see it. There we go. Yeah, we'll have 3 sewing stations where you've got that chevron forming.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, these are both kettle stitches.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to do the easy way. Now, if you recall, when we started this out, we sewed the outer case and the first signature all at once. Now, there's a way of sewing this together all at once. But if it's your first time, I do not recommend doing it. It's very clumsy and cumbersome and not fun. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do it the easy way. And I'm going to sew this on as we've been sewing signatures, and then we'll attach the case. So I'm going to line this up. So I'm kind of curious, when the computer crashed, what it did with the recording. Because usually in a Zoom video, as it's recording, when I end the Zoom meeting, it goes through a some sort of conversion process, and then it saves it out on my computer. I'm afraid that we may have lost everything before the crash,
Oh,
which would be unfortunate, because what I'll end up having to do is kind of do this all over again in front of the camera. And yeah. So I'm not really happy with the fact that it crashed on a couple different levels.
yeah.
And then I just restarted the recording, so we lost from whenever we picked back up. Regardless, if I have to record the video, so be it. That way you guys have at least some form of record of it, and I can also use it on the Patreon page.
Yeah.
But for the folks who didn't show up, they're going to be expecting to see that at some point.
Is it quite a lot of extra work to do the online stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, because like during the day, I run my bindery, so I do a lot of Bible repair. That's the crux of the work that I do.
Yeah.
I'm able to record some things, and I put that out on social media and stuff like that. But prepping for classes and things like this and creating tutorials for the Patreon, it's all, a lot of that's after hours. Sometimes I'll record a project as I'm working on it. Like I've got an 1850s Bible that I restored, and it was a functional restoration, so it wasn't a full on, they just wanted to be able to read it. And so I've been putting that out in parts. I think it's like I'm on part 6 or 7 of 10. But it takes time to go through and edit it. Correct the audio and zoom into where it needs to be zoomed in, etc., to make it a watchable piece. So yeah, it eats up a considerable amount of time. I would kill for an intern or an apprentice to be able to say, hey, go do this for me. Thank you.
Yeah, they'd have to be pretty tech savvy, wouldn't they?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let's see. You guys can see the press, right? I wish I had gone ahead and folded up a set, because typically what you want to do is after you fold your signatures, you're going to press them for overnight. And in our case, I don't think you want to hang out here on Zoom while these things press overnight. So, but what we're going to do And I'm gonna give them a real quick nip. And we'll pretend it was overnight. And then we'll continue on our way. All right. We'll just give them a minute in there. All right, so while those are pressing, what I'm going to do is figure out the holes in my boards. First thing I want to do is make sure I got my floral pattern going the same direction. I don't know if that necessarily matters, but that's what I'm going to do. All right, so I want my floral pattern that way. And grab. I don't know. Here, let's switch. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a template made to the size, same size as the board. I just put a little crease there. All right. So again, I'm going to come in a full centimeter from the edge of my board. Again, it's arbitrary. If you want it to be 2 centimeters, that's fine. You want to alternate them or create some sort of pattern. That is not out of the realm of possibilities. All right. I'm going to take a look at where my in this case, I made my text block the same size as my boards. So I'm going to put my first hole. I got to come in about a 15 millimeters. And again, arbitrary. That's just where I think it'll look good. All right. And I'm going to figure out what my spaces in between. That looks like 219. I'm just going to round it up and no, I'm sorry, 214. All right, so 214. I want to have 3 stations, so I need 4 spaces. So I'm going to take that space and divide it by 4. 4 times 5 is 20. Bring the 1 down. 4. Let's see. 3 times 4 is 12. 2, 0. So 53.5 is the space that I want. So I'm going to come down 53 half. 53 and a half. And I come from this direction, 51, 2, 3 and a half. All right. So the holes in the board. are going to be like this. So these two lines at my thumb are my kettle stitches, and then the three in the middle are going to be the other sewing stations. So double check my boards, make sure my flowers are the same way. All right, before I go all the way through, usually have board or something underneath here. Not yet. I've seen these done where people poke holes in here, punch holes. And then they'll set eyelets. Or metal eyelets.
Yeah.
Not an aesthetic I'm a fan of, but so I'm gonna put that way. But to each their own. Yeah, the thicker boards, the deeper you go, the tighter it gets to get it to turn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last one. Yay, and I see light all the way through. Good for them. Huh, so it's not all the way through. And pull the tip out. Okay, got light all the way through. How's everybody holding up?
Yeah, very good.
So ideally you want to let them press overnight, or as long as you can. in this particular case, I think they're gonna be fine. Just that little nip. Okay. So I'm not gonna make the hook. What I am gonna do is just line up. I made the template at the same height as the book. And as the folios. I'm going to wing it for the sake of time. But what I do want to do, I'm going to take these edge. What I just did is I extended these guys to the edge so I could actually see them. I'm going to use the larger awl this time, and I'm going to register this with the bottom. Weird having it so quiet. Like it's more than 10. A lot. Okay, there we go. All of the holes punched in the sewing stations. All right. Why is that set of holes off? I always end up with one set that just. I think it flipped around. Yeah, that's what it was, flipped around. All right, yeah, just double checking everything, making sure everything lines up. Like this one's. All right, well. Yeah, this one here is just a hair off of what I would like in a straight line. But, or maybe it's. Not sure what's going on there. Nope, definitely not that way. All right, we're just gonna go with it there. All right, I'm going to change out the battery real quick in the GoPro so you guys can see what's going on the bench. While I'm doing this, are there any questions?
I don't think so at the moment.
Okay, you guys have been awesome so far. I used to do a lot of training for the Boeing company, so I was always used to being up in front of people, but it's been a long time for that, and there's been so many delays on getting this series started that I was beginning to wonder if it was going to happen. So a lot of anxiety there. So
It's definitely been I can't thank you enough. It's been great.
glad you're enjoying it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's going to be great to be able to access the video again, just to have a refresher every now and then.
Yeah,
And well,
that's no, normally I'd post that on Monday, but given the crash and everything, give me a few days. It will get there. I just gonna have to reshoot it. Not happy about that. Okay, so let's turn you on. And we should have a GoPro here in a second. I'm watching my other screen with, it's got all the cameras on it, like a security, like you see in the movies, a guy watching the security thing with all the different, there we go. I came up. All right. The home stretch now.
Woohoo.
I usually do about 3 arm lengths, but I just sewed this one yesterday and I know it's going to take 4. I'm using a burgundy thread to match the case. And again, it's the same brand as before. It's a cotton linen. Cotton linen. It's a linen thread. Ireland, number 12, 3-ply,
Oh, wow.
that kind of thing. I've been meaning to, once I burn through my current thread, I would like to start just getting skeins, and
Yeah.
I don't know. Part of it is for the aesthetics. I like having the threads and everything hanging over my sewing frame. But part of it is, these things, you end up with all the loops. And it just seems the stuff that comes in a roll, knots more. And then, of course, there's my aversion to waxing my exposed bindings. All right, let's get you threaded up. I'm going to do something a little bit different. Last one I knotted. This one here, I'm going to just put the needle through. If that works a little better. Okay. Let's back this up. Add up. So just like before, we're going to start with the back case and the last signature. I mean, if it's not printed, I guess it doesn't really matter. And these are all blank, so I'm gonna start by coming in from the tail, coming out from the tail, inside to outside. I'm gonna leave myself enough inside that I can tie off. Excuse me, sorry. No. All right. And I'm gonna come in from the outside of the case. Probably want that angle. I just did that once. I'm going to come up and through a second time. Oh. I know, not the best angle to see from. All right. So now that I have my two loops in there, I'm going to slide that forward. I'm going to, without pulling my tail through, I'm going to tighten up that first one. It's like we ended up on the other side. Not. Okay. I'm going to bring my needle to figure out where it went. Trying to keep tension on that inside. It's probably why people put a knot there. Try and keep the inside snug. So we just went around and go back in through that hole. And I missed a signature. All right. I'm gonna make sure both these are fairly snug before I tie it off.
So am I right? Sorry, am I
Yep.
right in thinking that the two loops are sort of they're going around the board before you go back in to the signature?
Correct. You
Correct.
want to come out of the signature, you
Yeah.
go around the board twice,
Yeah.
and then you go behind the strings, behind your threads, and then you go back in through
Yeah.
the signature. So, and we're gonna do that again right here, so you'll be
Okay.
able to see that. So there you go, we got two cords, your two threads out here. I'm gonna come out. That's part of the joy of having more sewing stations, is it takes a little bit longer to get started. All right, so I come out and I go around the board twice.
Mm.
There's your first loop
Yeah.
right there. And then we're going to do a second loop. All right. So I'm going to snug up my first loop. I'm going to snug up my second loop. I'm going to pull the whole thing nice and snug.
Mm.
Then I'm going to go behind it.
Yeah.
And then back in. Okay, come out. There's the first loop. Second loop. Went up into the paper. Seriously?
Did you say with that first hole, you didn't tie it off, did you? Sort of in the middle of the section. Yeah, that
Here?
one.
Yeah, it tied off here.
Oh, you did. Okay, I just managed to miss it this
Yep.
time.
So,
Sorry.
yeah, so when I started off, I had a tail,
Yeah.
and then I did everything, the loops, I went behind it, I went back in, and then I tied it off before I went into the second hole.
Thank you.
Why this is fighting me. What it's trying to do is there's not enough room that there it goes, the needle to bend around, so it's trying to go up through into the paper, which obviously we don't want.
Yeah.
All right, there we go. We've got 5 sewing stations, the 2 kettle stitches, and then these will be the link stitches in between. And it's now attached to that first board. So we're going to move on to the next signature. I'm going to quickly enlarge these holes like I did before. Throw weight on there to help hold it down. All right. Now we're gonna, this is the beginning of the first kettle stitch. We'll sew it all along. I was just trying to make sure that my spines were all lined up.
Mhm.
So again, unlike the kettle stitch, you don't sew through the loop. You just dip behind, come back up and go back in. So you come out. Behind. You tangle up.
Mm.
Back in. Now, usually when I do these, I'll have the spine facing me and they'll be sitting at the edge of the table. Makes it a lot more accessible. I'm able to get a much tighter sewing. Not that I'm trying to make excuses, but I am. So this is where we actually want to do the kettle stitch. Pull it too tight. This paper has a lot of tension, so it wants to push it open. But because there's so much tension on the paper because of the thickness of the signatures, I'm actually holding it down on the inside. If I let it go, it's gonna pull these stitches. You know. Managed to get the camera and the So I think what I'm going to do for time's sake is not do all 10 of these signatures, because at this point, it's going to be rinse and repeat. You're going to sit here for the next hour watching me sew this together. I'm going to put on one more signature, and then I'm going to attach the board. I'm going to end up cutting this apart anyway to reshoot the video for because of what we lost. Nope, I don't want to go in there. This is the kettle stitch. I'm sitting here talking and not paying attention. There, I pulled the loop back out. So I've got it. So if that's acceptable to you, that way I can do the full. I'll do the full one on the video when I make up the video.
Yep.
Are either of you in any of the other demonstrations? Like next
Yeah,
week, we've got a secret Belgian binding or zigzag binding coming up.
Yeah, I've definitely booked a couple more.
All right.
I'm looking forward to them.
I've signed up for the pamphlet one,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
that's the only one so far.
Okay. The pamphlet one should be fun. There's a lot of history there that
Mm.
I think people are aware of pamphlets and they know that they were political, but they were huge. Okay. Am I going to lose that camera now? No, it's still at 87%. That's interesting. Yeah, the joys of GoPros. I never know what that camera is going to do to me. Image quality, it's great. I'm not complaining about it. The battery life. I almost forgot what direction I was going in. Yeah, the pamphlet stitch was actually supposed to be the first one, and because of the way things got jumbled around, I think it's going to be like second to last now. I figured the demonstrations that had paid customers would get done first. I kept pushing these things out.
Is it all because you had to move your workshop sort of back home?
Well, that was, yeah, part of it, moving the workshop, getting the technology and everything set up here.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to shoot in my. Okay, it's doing it again. That's interesting. It's funny because I'm not recording through the GoPro. I'm just using it as a camera, like you would a webcam or any other video camera. And for some reason, it keeps saving, which doesn't make sense to me because I'm not filming through it. But that's okay. Yeah, I used to have this large open space And it was great. And now I have this house. It was built in 1928, and the rooms are more like hallways. They're really long and they're not very deep. So being able to set up a camera in here and lights so it doesn't look like crud proved to be a little bit of a challenge. And then every time I get something set up, something breaks or doesn't want to work, or the internet goes out, the power goes out. Like it's a comedy of errors. It's just, but the bookbinding gods have smiled on me. Things are moving along. And while I would like to make some improvements, the courses are now happening. So
yeah,
I'm okay with that.
yeah.
Last kettle stitch. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to attach the board. We're going to pretend that I did 10 signatures. And all right, so when you go to attach the board, you're going to come around the outside and you're going to make those 2 loops. All right. Initially, you'll keep it fairly loose and fluid till you get them both in.
Yep.
Or, you just slide everything around with dog hair everywhere. And I just nodded. And I trim my nails to play the guitar, and I can't grip anything with my nails. Okay. I gotta figure out which one I'm pulling on. All right. So you want to get your board and your spines all lined up. I'm going to pull my first loop to make sure that I pull it taut on the inside. I'm going to pull my second loop to cinch that down, tighten it down. And then I'm going to pull the thread, tighten up my second loop. Now, of course, with bookbinding, you want everything nice and snug. You don't want it super tight. You'll end up with pulling in ways that you don't really want. All right, so I did my loops. I'm going to go behind them like we did before.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of cinches them together. And then I'm going to go back in that last signature. I'm going to assume that I nailed it right. And I'm going to pull this all in. Boom. Now, without loosening it, I'm going to go back out that next sewing station. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pull this all the way through. We'll make our 2 loops while holding everything together. Dog hair. All right, there's my first loop. And I'm gonna, nope, and from the outside. Do my second loop. Can you imagine trying to do this with a straight needle?
No.
Um, yeah, in the last week, I've watched a lot of tutorials to see if there's different variations other than what I know. And yeah, there's people out there doing this with straight needles, and I'm like, oh, you're crazy. But okay. Pull my first loop, tight. Second one. And that's okay. Everyone, you do what you're comfortable with. And
Yeah.
I tried this once when I first started trying to do a Coptic, and yeah, no, not at all. And oh, what did we do? What did we do? Oh. Not. I'm talking and not paying attention. Come on, just let go. There we go. All right. Disaster averted. I remember when I first started off, I used to get so mad when that happened. All right. Back in through the hole. Home stretch. It's there. First loop. Seems a bit loose to me. The board's had a little bit of a bow, so in the middle it wants to pull that up. Used a little bit too much glue when I put the paste down on it. Okay. That's okay. There we go. Gonna pre-detangle so it doesn't knot. Okay. I didn't need that anyway. Okay. I keep looping the string around the camera. This thread is just bound and determined, not a. Guess I did need that. Sorry for all the close-ups of my hand. Should be a Palmolive commercial at this point. Okay, first loop. And second. All right. Again with the camera. Uh, so I'm going to switch to the overhead for this. Open this up. All right, and how you tie this off, I mean, you can do it right here. I usually come to the previous sewing station and I sew it there or knot it there. You know, or the thread will just knot it. So there we go. Didn't mean to pull it that tight that fast. And get the second one. All right. Way too much more string thread. All right, boom. So this is a little thinner than the other one, but there you go. You got your 5 sewing stations, 2 kettle stitches, 3 Coptic links. Looks like my paper might be a little bit bigger than it should have been, but there you go.
That's
Of course.
3 hours of my life that have flown by.
What's that?
That's 3 hours of my life that have flown by.
Should have been a little quicker than that. I had this planned for 2 hours, but I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't believe it's been 3 hours because I've obviously been in a happy place.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm definitely pleased to hear that. I kind of wondered, being the first few, how these were going to go. I'm gonna plan on doing some more complicated structures in the fall, and there'll probably be 2 like 6-hour sessions. But like to do something like if we wanted to do this, the preparation one day would be spent just doing boards. You have to drill them, and there's some chiseling that needs to be done, and all kinds of stuff. And then the next day would be the actual sewing of the book. But I wanted to do like I did. We're going to do the thing on the pamphlets, and that's really simple and easy. The actual physical demonstration of sewing a pamphlet should take 5 minutes or less. I mean, it's an incredibly simple stitch, but it's a conversation about the history of this particular ephemera and how it shaped the world. And it even continues how it relates to today's social media. And kind of to give you a little bit of a sample of it, I love Thomas Paine. I would like to think if I were born in that time period, him and I might have been friends, maybe drinking buddies, who knows? But I don't necessarily agree with everything. His thought process, his critical thinking skills are, especially for that day, were very cool. Now, Thomas Paine was very vocal about his dislike for revealed religion. And it wasn't to say he didn't believe in a God, he just didn't believe in the God of revealed religion. So he wrote a lot of papers on that subject. Well, back in that day, they didn't have Twitter. If you wanted to be social in that aspect, you would publish a letter in the paper. The paper would publish it. So he ended up in a Twitter conversation, if you will, with the Bishop of Landreth. And so Thomas Paine would write something about the Bible, whatever his particular thought was that particular day. He'd publish it in the paper. The Bishop of Landreth would read it over in England, and he'd respond to it in the paper. So it was a very long conversation, right? But a lot of Thomas Paine's works were published as pamphlets. And even some of this conversation was published as a pamphlet, I believe. Now, I ended up, I have the complete works of Thomas Paine, but reading his letters, a lot of his responses, well, I didn't know what the bishop said. It was a one-sided conversation. So I ended up finding an original printing, like I think it was 1776, 1778, somewhere in there. The Bishop of Landreth published an apology for the Bible. And it's a series of letters in response to Thomas Paine, blah, blah, blah. So one of my goals this year is to letterpress Thomas
Oh,
Paine's
nice.
letters and Landreth, his letters in one volume in
Nice.
conversational order.
Huh.
And I don't know if I'll get it done this year. At the very least, I definitely want to get it started. If I can get the digital files made and start making, I'll make plates instead of using type, movable type. But I think that'd be a lot of fun. But
Mhm.
Thomas Paine was pivotal. I'm tired. In the use of pamphlets and their fame, especially with the publication of Common Sense and there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So huge conversation around that. Very simple demonstration as far as showing the stitch. I mean, there's what, 3-hole, 5-hole, 6-hole. Okay, we're done. So that's gonna be a fun one. And like I say, if you're in the Secret Belgian one, it'll be very similar to this. Hopefully I'll be a little bit more organized, but yeah, that's all I got for you today.
That's been good. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, and yeah, give me a few days to reshoot this, and maybe I can get some better camera angles because I know my hands got in the way. I really intended for this camera to be over here so I can work, and it would come in at a better angle. And
Yep.
having it on the bench like that, it was the best I could do with the stand breaking, but we'll get there. All right. So did you have any questions at this point?
No, that was great.
All
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
going to give you
you.
your time back. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
I appreciate it.